Oh, that's such a good question. What was my enlightenment experience like? Okay, it's going to be fun to answer. What I do know, so if I think of the first one I had on the second day, I don't really remember a transition into it. And they had mentioned that, like, oh, you'll know when it happens and it's instant and things like that. And that's what it felt like. That's what I remember. It felt like one moment there was a sense of, oh, I think I'm getting the hang of this process here. And the next thing you know, I exploded in this, like my whole being exploded with radiant light. Everything was so clear. Everything was so clear. The truth of who I am beyond the personality was so clear. It was laughable. The truth of myself, the truth of life, all of it was laughable. I couldn't stop laughing. I was crying while I was laughing. I, my face, it's like my muscles couldn't even accommodate the sheer stretch of the smile that was bursting out of my heart. I was melting into this profound sense of well being, peace, love, compassion. I felt, my body felt simultaneously extremely grounded. Like now I understand. Beforehand they had talked about a previous participant's experience, saying that he described it as I felt like my whole life I was a deflated balloon, and then all of a sudden the balloon had filled up, like I had filled my body. So I was deeply, deeply in my body to the point where just sitting and being was the most fulfilling and delicious experience. Like I could have just kept on sitting for hours and hours and hours in absolute bliss. I was blissed out. And at the same time that I felt so grounded, there was this electric vibrancy in my body. Like every cell in my body was vibrating with aliveness. I wanted to dance. I wanted to sing. Like this energy was like rising up in my body and right up to my crown. And I could feel how much energy was concentrated in my upper chakras, especially doing so much contemplation and having no distractions. They had my phone. You couldn't bring a book, you couldn't bring a notepad, no jewelry, no cosmetics, like no distractions whatsoever. So the fact that I was fully focused on this contemplation process made me feel as if my awareness had narrowed to a single point. It was so precise. It was like a laser. And while my awareness was single pointed, at the same time, I could feel this openness, like just around my body, that made me feel like I was a satellite dish. And I could pick up on the most subtle of sensory input. Like it was incredible how rich my experience became. Trying to see if there's anything else I could say about it. It was I all of a sudden I understood what they meant when they said that you'll know when you get there, and there's a different quality to your experience. So even though I'm still in this retreat center having these dyads and you know I can see my human body having these interactions, but my sense of being was cosmic sized. After that dyad, I was lit up with universal energy. And in the closing talk of that night, Russell Scott made a joke that made me laugh so hard and suddenly that I thought I had inverted my nasal passages and they shot out my nose. Like it was ridiculous. So I went to bed that night, woke up the next morning feeling more grounded and back to earth. And in the first dad, it was so interesting because I was paired with like a 70-year-old Italian man with the most beautiful smile I've ever seen. Like this man had such a beautiful, wondrous sense of childlike wonder, beautiful energy. And he was exploding all over the place, whereas I was grounded. So as we go through the dyad, I remember at one point, I'm saying things like, what's most real is I'm feeling grounded. And, some things were arising, but nothing in particular was happening until all of a sudden it felt like my throat cracked open. So I had a lot of aching in my throat during this process. Like it felt like the muscular tension in my throat was releasing as I was simply learning to recognize and be with and communicate my truth authentically at a whole new level. And so I felt the aching in my throat again. And all of a sudden, I just broke open, Morgan. And it was as if grief was being pulled out of my tissues. I had such a cathartic release, like those deep, 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 gut wrenching, grieving cries. It was so wonderful. Russell Scott was there holding space for me because everyone else had gone to breakfast at that point. And I remember saying to him, I'm not suffering right now. I'm not in pain. I'm loving this. I am loving this. So I just allowed the grief to pour forth, breathing, like applying everything I've learned from plant medicines on how to allow the emotion to birth. And by the time I got to the other end of it, I landed back in that enlightenment space from the night before, completely blissed out in that space of perfect clarity of this is who I am and this is what life is about, like just melting into love and aliveness and all of that, right? I went through that whole process, but it was amplified even more because now I was going back into it. So when I was done my process, Russell said, go talk to Monica, one of the monitors for the retreat. She was in the lunchroom. So I went to go talk with her. And as I was describing to her my process and what I was feeling and what I was experiencing to the best of my abilities, suddenly I had the insight of, oh, what I experienced here is a direct experience. This is a direct experience. I realized that on some level, I was holding an assumption of what an enlightenment experience is. The classic, like you're going to white out and, there's a certain extreme of experience that I was imagining. And I knew that I couldn't imagine it, that it wouldn't necessarily show up the way I expected. So I was prepared for it, but still on some level, I was leveraging that as a measuring stick of like, if I didn't have that experience, I didn't have an enlightenment experience yet. So I'm talking to Monica and I'm like, oh, wow, there's different levels of awakening. This is a direct experience. And I've had this before. I've had this before several times. Oh my God. And it just hit me all at once. It was so profound. So, so, so profound because this wasn't something that I took a substance for and the substance gave me an experience. And then when the substance had worn off, the experience was gone. It was something fundamental in my being that was shifting because I got there through my own process of contemplation. I'm gaining a whole new respect for, oh, I am all over the notion of contemplation right now, realizing that I have been doing this through writing and through walking, but I didn't know I was doing it. So I couldn't practice it as consciously as I can now. And ever since I came back, my ability to be with my experience and open up to it in a cosmic playfulness kind of way. My ability to feel into my truth, to communicate it, is completely different. It feels so organic now. I'm much more authentic. All of my interactions with every single person I've encountered this week, whether it was the guy at the gas station or at Popeye's supplement store or my relationships, it's unbelievable, the way I'm interacting with people has changed. There is a tremendous amount of creative kundalini energy happening. Like my mind is absolutely exploding with inspiration in a way that, oh, I wish I could devote myself full time to it, right? I've got my full-time job and I'm pouring a lot of that energy in there. Like I'm working with it at work to develop my skills there. But there's also a new level of clarity in terms of, for years I've been saying like, oh, I'm going to write and I'm going to speak and I'm going to maybe dance, like share my dancing, my singing, all of these things. But I never quite got around to it because I realized there was a block there. That was one of my big insights from the retreat. The reason why I wasn't moving forward in any of these creative endeavors is because I was too afraid on a deep level to be my true self, to a degree I didn't even recognize. Now I see it. And on top of that, there's now a unifying purpose to all of these activities. And the purpose is I am here to cultivate my connection to my true self as much as possible at all times. And through my art, help people recognize their own true selves. So now I have a vision for what I want to create. And it feels like everything's falling into place. It's wild. It's wild. I can't believe how powerful that was. Everything, for months, the synchronicities have been happening and leading me up to this retreat, like absolutely obvious, huge synchronicities. And now I understand why. It's like it took everything I've been working on in the last 12 years and catalyzed it into my next level of evolution. Like just like that. Oh, and it's so interesting because I've read like over 1,000 pages of Peter Ralston's teachings, Russell Scott's teachings in preparation for this retreat. And it really helped with the process because I had some conceptual sense that led me to the experience, because I know the concept is not the experience itself. And this week, when I was reading Peter Ralston's materials, because I'm finishing up the last of the 4 books of his, I finished 2 of them. One is 3/4 done, and the other I just started. So I'm making my way through them. But as I'm reading his teachings now, I understand them on a completely different level, an experiential one. Whereas before it felt more like I get this, I understand this conceptually, intellectually, but again, I know that's not the experience itself. So anyways, that's the best description I can give of my process, but I am I'm feeling into it, but right now my intention is to go back in May and continue to work with this method because it's so, like I said, it's so pure, it's so simple, 4 little steps, and boom, enlightenment experiences. Even the rest of the group, like the catharsis that was happening, the laughing, the crying, the anger, like all of, because with the communication process, you're basically clearing out the layers of your truth. And with each layer of truth you connect to, you get closer to connecting with the truth of your deeper self. That's what the idea is. And even people that join the group that didn't really have much experience at all with this kind of consciousness work, by the end of the retreat, I don't know if they had like something shifted in them. Something shifted in them for sure. So I'm very excited to go back in May and keep working with this. And thankfully, Russell Scott is putting on a 6-week follow-up program for those that were a part of the retreat. And thank God he's doing that, because it really, I was expecting it, but it really is interesting how you can have such a cosmic experience and then come back to your day-to-day life and slowly feel the personality creeping in again. I know that's normal. That's completely normal. But I was like wondering, like, how do I continue to cultivate this and keep it nice and strong, right? It's not always going to be full blast, but but I want to be able to maintain even a subtle level of connection to it, so that I can begin to embody that true self more and more, what Russell Scott calls the enlightenment process, right? Because yes, you can have an enlightenment experience, but it's not like it's going to completely change your life in a second. Generally speaking, there might be rare exceptions. And so he talks a lot about, well, okay, so you've had this experience, now what? How do you bring it into your day-to-day life? So I'm very intrigued to continue this integration process. Very intrigued to see what is going to birth on a creative level. There's a deep passion right now to develop my strategic thinking, because I realize that I've been working on a micro level more. Now I want to work on a macro level. I've been developing this all year. Anyways, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit now, but yeah, I'm just so excited to continue this process. This is ridiculous. This is wild. This is magnificent. Like, oh, what a gift. What a ride. What a journey. It's amazing, Morgan. And I'm so glad that I can fully open up to you about this process and you get it. You've had your experiences as well. Because, as I'm sure you know, you can't talk about this with everyone, right? I definitely can't talk about this like openly with my coworkers, for example. Family and friends don't really get it. So it's nice to be able to fully share about the experience and know that you're going to be able to relate to it. So yeah, wow, 18 minutes. Didn't mean for it to be that long, but here we are. Hope you enjoy the podcast.